Alright, hello everybody. So this is a re-upload of my Dystopian Wars version 3.04 Intermediate Players Tips and Tricks. So I got a little feedback on my last version of this, and I worked through it, thought through it, and it's largely the same. I really appreciate the feedback that I had received. And I took into account that maybe I needed to explain some of this a little bit more clearly. I have taken off all of the SRS for this video. This is just going to be a tactics video. I'm going to re-record the SRS later. Alright, so let's go. So the overview for this video, we're going to go over what are you playing for, the objectives, some advanced intermediate things to think about for your deployment, movement, and shooting. We're not covering assaults, rams, or aerial tactics. I primarily play Union. I don't like aerial units. Since all of my rockets have extreme range, I usually kill aerial units before they do anything. And I don't particularly like my aerial units, so I don't bring them. So I'm not the person to ask about aerial units. Rams, again, I haven't had them used against me heavily, and Union isn't really a ramming faction. So again, I don't have very much insight on that. And then assaults, I usually just use special tokens to assault. I actually do have some insight on assault, but I'll save that for another video. So let's go. Okay, what are you playing for? So this is one of the things that I got feedback for, and the person that gave the feedback let me know, hey, by the end of the game you don't have enough units to score, so it's only worth it to kill the enemy army. And I will say the answer to that is still no. And here's the reason why. A fleet is only worth about 6 victory points, okay? A flagship is worth 1. A multiple ship unit is worth 1. A one ship unit is worth 0. Okay? And again, the cards are very hard to get to work sometimes. Sometimes they're very easy. Sometimes they're just kill a mass 2 unit, cripple a mass 2 unit. But I find that usually they'll get you maybe an extra 3 or 4 points over the course of the game. So now let's look at these missions, and with the exception of one mission, I think that unless you're good enough to table your opponent or your opponent's bad enough to be tabled, you need to go for the mission. The mission will still score you the majority of your points, and it's more reliable than relying on the right card at the right time. Unless you're playing like, you know, a scrying deck. Which you kind of can in this game, but I think most people aren't going to be doing that. And further, you know, with Fortunes of War out there, it might be harder to score if you're using your cards to cancel valuable valor effects, like reroll whatever dice you want in this pool. So I'll go over the mission. So first, Fog of War. This is interesting because at least for turn 1, both players have full obscured. This does have limitations to it, of course, but you can kind of think that at least round 1, everybody's going to have a little bit more defense. But this is a table quarter game. Now, here's the way that I look at this. It's kind of hard, I think, to get your 2 points during the game. I think it's certainly possible. The key is the units need to be wholly within the table quarter. So some guy is riding the line with a unit. That unit is not in the table quarter. Okay. And then number 2, if you're planning to table your opponent anyway, you should be able to clear out a quarter. That's a lot easier than clearing off every ship on the table. And at the end of the game, it's worth 5 points. Now look at that, right? If you have even one unit in an empty enemy table quarter, or at least an enemy table quarter that doesn't have a unit fully within it, you've just scored yourself 5 points. That's almost the entirety of the enemy fleet. Hold at all costs. This is a low scoring game. It's 2 points for each unit in the enemy deployment zone with no enemy within 10 inches. This one, if you're sitting here on 2 units at the end of the game, or real trashed units, you're almost better off trying to deny your enemy the points, or maybe your enemy's going for it too and you each score 4 or something like that. This is more of a mission that, unless you're really dominating or you actually haven't lost anything, I think will be a low score. At the very least, you'll probably be exchanging with the enemy. Maybe you've cleared out his backboard and he's cleared out yours, and you guys are just swapping points, so it's kind of even Stevens. Next one, salvage. 2 victory points per salvage, max 6. This is another one, again, this one's very random, but it's not hard to pick up the salvage. It is an operation, but you get to deploy 3 of those salvage tokens on your side of the, well, wherever you wish. And it tends to just be like a linear dash, picking up salvage. Again, 6 points. Even if your enemy gets 1, you get 2. You're still ahead by a lot. Oil fields, if you get oil fields, you just really need to focus on scoring, and that's it, and trying to deny your enemy to score when you can. It's almost like fleet points are irrelevant at this mission. You can potentially score 6 points a round, and I've seen it. Then, what else we got? Rule the waves. This is just fog of war without the obscured. And then Tempest, this is another high scorer. It's 5 points for each unit in the center of the table. Now think about this for just a second, all right? If your fleet is only worth 6 and you only have 1 unit at the end of the game, then you just scored 5 points. You just matched your enemy, almost wiping you out. So that's what I'm trying to say. The missions are important. Ships are not worth enough, and I find that the scoring cards tend to be fairly unreliable. So, like I say, make your choice, but if you're trying to table your opponent, eventually that guy, I guess here's kind of a more intermediate philosophy. If you're good enough to reliably table your opponent so that you don't need to worry about board control, you don't need to worry about anything, something's gone wrong. Either you're playing broken stuff, in which case it's going to get patched out, or you're just an asshole and you're not going to have anybody to play with, right? Or your players will get better, hopefully by watching videos like these, and suddenly you won't be able to table them anymore. But if you play more conservatively, you can preserve your fleet better. And if you go for the missions, if you're going for the mission and your opponent isn't, you should beat him every time if you can actually score. He just shouldn't be able to score enough points from killing your ships to match what you can score on the mission. All right. So this is just to keep in the back of your mind. So think about, here's where, this is about how far you'd need to get if you need to be in the enemy deployment zone at the end of the round. I suggest not making a linear dash for it. You're just going to get those ships killed. Just take a ship, ask yourself, how fast is this thing going to move with its drift? How many rounds will it take me to get into his deployment zone? If you're playing table quarters, that's when you want to figure out, do some weak flank, strong flank kind of stuff. And what I would actually suggest is start out piling your strong flank up. See what your enemy deploys in response to your strong flank, and then deploy your weak flank last. And hopefully they don't have very much of a job cleaning up that weak flank and they can score on it. But if your opponent puts a more balanced fleet on the table, then maybe just try to support some of your weak flank with your strong flank. The weak flank is not supposed to be a couple of monitors, by the way. It should be maybe 1 or 2 units of strong cruisers. It's just the majority of your other armies and the rest of the flank, where just weight of numbers will make them intimidating. And either your opponent will run from you, or your opponent will stack up to try to come after you, or they'll even try to go in the center. And remember, you get to pick the ships that are taking the damage, not the opponent. So if you have a ship that's, or if you have a unit that's half into the quarter you want and half out, and maybe one ship is fully in, you know, and one ship's fully out, then kill the one that's fully in, right? Or just leave them alone because the unit is out. This will give you a good idea of the oil rig placements. You can see all you have to do is approach within a certain distance, and at the end of the round, if you're still there, you score the points. Your friendly oil rig is very easy to take round 1. Very, very easy to take. These are mass 3 oil rigs, so you can hide mass 1s and mass 2 ships behind them. I think that the appropriate miniature for the oil rig is the big platform. It's a mass 3 platform, and I think it's basically just an oil rig. The enemy oil rig is not that hard to get into, and you have to be careful of that, because that means that your friendly oil rig is vulnerable for your opponent to score all those points. Always keep that in mind to score. I really, really mean this. If you're just going to table, as soon as your opponent smartens up, you're just going to lose all your games, period. All right, and then of course, think about the center of the table. For Tempest, you do not need to be in the center until the end of the game. It is a little dangerous to be in the center. However, like I say, I've played an Italian player, and he just threw all his stuff center, and it was just like, game's over, man. I can't clear you out of there. He put his full force there. I had some strategic reserves come in. He just smashed what I had on the table, and then the strategic reserves just didn't have it. Especially as Union, you can't use operations when you come in from strategic reserves, so it was just like, you know, I was just trying to beat him with a wet noodle. But all right, let's go ahead and move on to deployment. Okay, so there's a concept I want to explain. This is something that's in all, it's kind of in all war games where you alternate to deploy, but it's especially important in alternating activation war games. And that's an idea of deployment initiative. It's, you want to deploy something good into something good your opponent just deployed. You want to deny your opponent any good targets for when he deploys, okay? So this kind of means that, you know, when you set up, you can count an enemy unit in just the right spot for you, but not for him, right? So you're either taking advantage of something bad about him, or he can't shoot you, or maybe you can get in time, or maybe he's in range of your SRS, but your SRS or his SRS are not in range of you. So the other thing about this is there are 3 deployment zones, or there's 3 deployment phases in this game. This is a big deal. Air, which basically screws you from having deployment initiative. If you have an air army, you pretty much just give up deployment initiative to your opponent. He can make sure to perfectly deploy everything he wants exactly where he needs it for your stuff, because you finish your deployment phase before he deploys most of his army. Maybe he had 1 or 2 air units, but like I say, that's rough. Subs tend to have great deployment initiative because they have their own deployment phase, right? So if you think about like these pack hunter subs, these little crummy subs that maybe they have, 22, 24 dice. Well, think about this. They can deploy exactly where they need to be to get their extreme range torpedoes on exactly what they want. It's very, very powerful. So this is another point. Deployment initiative, it only really matters, or at least it should really only matter, for a few very important units in your fleet. And we'll go over that. So, deployment. Player B starts deploying non-aerial units. This usually gives player A a deployment initiative or an advantage there. So before you even start deploying, you need to start this goes when you're building a fleet, right? So ask yourself, what units do I have are going to score? What units I have are going to defend? What ranges are most optimal for my units? What targets are appropriate for my units? And do I have aerial units which are going to hurt my deployment initiative? And then you should ask the same questions about your opponent's force before you deploy anything. This is very, very, very important because you want to be intelligently responding to your opponent. All right, so what units do I have that don't care where my opponent deploys? All right, let's say you have some super long range, some SRS that can pretty much hit the board, or they don't have a particular unit they care about, just something where you don't care, or it's just like some reliant monitors, some crummy monitors you're just using to hold ground or something like that. Well, deploy them first because it doesn't matter where they go, right? It's not important where they are, so you can kind of get to where you can respond well with something else. What units do I have that must respond to an opponent's unit? Okay, maybe you do have a real long-range threat and you need it to take out one of his long-range threats, or maybe you're planning to take out his SRS, right? Well, then what you want to do is figure out what your target is, and then deploy in response to that target. Now, don't be stupid about it. If you've got, let's say it's a good SRS ship, and he still has a lot of stuff on his side that's good at killing SRS, and perhaps will kill your carriers before they even get a chance to really activate, then hold on to that activation if you can. And then, what must I hide from the opponent, right? If you're dealing with an opponent with a lot of extreme ranged weapons, ask yourself, what do I want to hide? What do I just, at all costs, it can't get crippled round one, like carriers. Save them for last, and if you can't, do your best to hide them so that there's no good line of fire anywhere on the table. It's easier said than done, but just think about these things for deployment, and you'll have initiative kind of right off the bat for the game. If suddenly all of your opponent's units are in bad positions and your units are all in good positions, then it's just a joke. Like if your opponent has, say, I don't know, Chesapeake Gatling batteries, they're only really effective at point blank, and you throw something at range that can just kill them as they come in, he's just in a world of hurt. You pretty much neutralized that unit. Or let's say he has something that's made to kill your carriers, but you put your carriers out of range. Now he's on the back foot. Now he's got to go chase you down. So really think hard about that. Deployment initiative is kind of like activation initiative during a game. When you start to get to choose the activations, it's really going to cause a lot of hurt for your opponent, especially when you have more activations than your opponent. It can be real hard on them. Putting units down. So, okay, pre-measure. This all you need to do. You're allowed to pre-measure in this game, so you better damn start pre-measuring. This is something I mentioned earlier. Figure out how many rounds of movement will it take your vessel to score, right? Whatever the thing is, how many rounds will it actually take for your vessel to get there? Let's say no matter what, it'll take you 2 rounds to get into your enemy's deployment zone. Well, guess what? You can hide that ship until round 4, right? Just keep it alive, or you can play very conservatively with it, hold it back, or keep it in a defensive position, and then bolt for it at the very end. Hopefully you opened up a bolt hole for that ship, but keep that in mind. So if you've got the deployment initiative, measure the movement plus the effective range of your target. Okay, the effective range for us is the range band where they can cripple or destroy your ship. And try to stay out of that kill zone and put them in yours. Okay, so if they've got like a real close range punchy ship, put something long range in there, or figure out what his max effective range is. Because if you can, it'll give you an advantage. If you can draw him in, hit him, and then activate before him, you get 2 rounds of shooting on him. That should be enough. So for extreme range weapons, account for drift before placing them, obviously. I say that's obvious, but some people don't think about it. You could drift behind a hill or something like that and not be happy. You'll likely not be able to hide a unit entirely. Try to set up for obscured when possible. Okay, and that just means that the center point of the enemy cannot see the center point of your ship. That's not hard to do. The reason I'm saying this, I started playing with bigger islands where you could easily hide stuff, and then the creator of the game kind of said, no, you should be playing with small islands. He didn't out and out say it, but it sounded like the archipelago style islands is what he thought might have been best for the game. And when you're playing islands that small, you're not going to be able to hide anything. You'll have trouble hiding mass ones. So I still play with big enough islands to hide stuff, but if that becomes more prevalent later on in later iterations of the game, well, if you're not relying on colossal land masses to hide your fleet, then you should be fine. The most desirable spots for board quarter scoring games is the center, just because you can respond to both sides, and instead of having a strong flank and a weak flank, you just have a strong center. And this is just some advice. We kind of went through this over it already. If you already see your opponents deploying strong in the center, then try and make a strong flank and a weak flank. It'll force them to split, or you'll be able to pick off one side and score that way. And then since he's in the center, he's kind of less prepared to take the other flank and score off of it. I think holding the center is still better, though, even with that in mind. All right, let's go on to movement. So, again, the objectives of the game should dictate the urgency of your movement. If it's an endgame score, then just take it easy. Take your foot off the gas. Do not drive into enemy kill zones. Let them drive into yours if they're foolish enough to. All right? Turning takes away very little forward movement to a degree. If you're only doing turn 2, you've hardly lost like half an inch of movement. So don't be afraid, especially if you have an aft gun. Make sure that you take that couple inches of turning movement. You should still have a lot of forward movement to bring those in. And of course, whenever possible, you want to activate in response to an enemy unit, unless your units are already in the perfect position for an attack. Let's say you have some extreme ranged weapons and the target that you want is sitting in extreme range. Blow them out of the water. And then potentially SRS or operations that you want to do before the enemy can shoot or respond. Let's say you've got, you're doing salvage. You probably want to activate your salvage ship to get that salvage done before they can destroy it. But and then of course SRS. SRS can be good to do in response with magnetic generators. If you can hold your SRS back until they've activated their ships carrying their magnetic generators, then you're on easy street because they can't hit you with the magnetic anymore. Flak they can always hit you with. That goes off at the end of the turn. And of course they're interceptoral. But generally speaking, it's so easy to cripple carriers that's kind of a dangerous move. And of course, determine the enemy's optimal range and speed and measure that. Don't move yourself into that bubble. Unless the move will result in like your optimal strike, like you're actually going to cripple or sink the ship, it's just bad news for you. Even then, think about it. You move in to your optimal position, you hit him, whether it be long or closing. Well, there's a good chance that he can move into the range band he wants and hit you back, probably harder than you hit him. At least for round one. Once it gets to later rounds and you guys are closer, it's a different story. You should have the movement no matter where you guys are. But round one's very important. I think it's better to be a little cagey unless you're dealing with all extreme range weapons. And just some advice, guns are generally best at closing range. Rockets are generally closing and long. All right. So here I've got a picture example, and this is so we've measured out, this is the orange ship, this is his move, this is his optimal firing range, okay? Blue is activating. He's moved in. Orange is actually out of blue's optimal range, but he's in blue's poor range. Blue just moved because he thought it would be great he just really wanted to nail that orange ship with a little damage. Well, generally speaking, when you're firing at a poor range for you, you're not going to cripple the enemy ship, which means they'll be at full strength after you fought them. And look where blue is. Blue's sitting in orange's optimal range. Orange is just going to devastate blue when he gets to go. He'll be able to move and then hit him with his heavy firepower or his focused gunnery or whatever and probably kill him. So if you must activate before orange and you're already in a poor damage band, let's say you're already at long range or something like that, then go ahead and move forward, but at least stay out of his optimal range. This might mean that you're out of your poor range still, but guess what? You're set up for next round, right? Next round, you can finish it off. And hopefully you'll be taking suboptimal damage next round, and you'll be able to do something, or maybe you'll even go before orange and get him in your optimal range and take him out. Well, like I say, always think about that before you move. We wanted to plan out what our units are going to do when we build our roster. We want to plan out who they're after and what their job is when we place our units. And then we want to plan out, like more focused now, how are they going to avoid damage? You know, how are they going to use their movement to stay out of enemy kill zones? Like I say, sometimes it's unavoidable. You know, if it's extreme ranged rockets, it's hard to deal with for anybody. Hopefully you've got obscured or good aerial defense, or you'll just be able to take it on the chin. Shooting. So I don't know that this is controversial, but definitely go for cripples. Try to cripple enemy ships. You should be able to cripple a ship in one activation. You just need 2 pools of 12 dice. As we know, 1 die equals about a hit. You'd like to get a few more dice to make it more reliable, or you'd like a rule like sustained or fusillade or something that gives you rerolls to make it more reliable. But just in the back of your mind, you can keep in mind about 12 dice 2 shots of that should cripple a cruiser. And that is not hard to get. That is actually like a heavy gun battery and a gun battery at closing, or 2 heavy rocket batteries. Easy, easy. Conversely, a 24 damage pool is very hard to get, and it will cause a catastrophic explosion. But if you're dealing with 4 battle-ready and 4 crippled hull vehicles, the extra 2 damage is kind of a waste, right? It'll put him 2 damage into crippled, but are you really going to be able to finish him off if you already used a 24 pool on that ship? And is it worth finishing him off or going to another ship and trying to cripple him if you even have the guns for it? I don't think so. I think it's better to go to cripple ships. It reduces their combat effectiveness, and you can finish them off the next round. If you could cripple 2 ships in a round, you can destroy those 2 ships next round. And if you can cripple them before they shoot, then guess what? They have reduced weapons effectiveness. Again, 2 guns, 2 heavy gun batteries at closing should be able to do this damage to regular cruisers, and 2 heavy rocket batteries at long or closing should be able to do that. And it kind of means 2 line cruisers can cripple a cruiser. Now, by contrast, it takes about 5 of each of those guns to do the same thing. Not 4, right? Not double. I couldn't just straight combine it. I do not have enough dice if I combine 4. Now I need 5. Well, let's think about that for just a second. It's not effectively done anything else to the unit, right? I still have 1 crippled cruiser. It just took me 3 ships to get there. If you can do it without losing a lot, go ahead and do it. And then sometimes for certain heavy ships that have an extra hull point in battle ready, you kind of need to do that, or at least get some more chip damage in to get them into crippled. So I find that just going for spamming smaller shots is better. The time this backfires is if your opponent has good shield generators. Shield generators deal with these small dice pools a little better, so you'll have to try to add more guns in at that point, if you can. And then the other thing is think about your faction's weapons and special rules and pick out your configurations for crippling cruisers. Certain factions are much more deadly than regular gun batteries, or they deal damage kind of in different ways, like alchemical. But just the basics, and I would suggest if you're an intermediate player, play with basic cruisers. As soon as you start getting complicated, the cruisers actually usually start getting poorer. They usually have some big flaw or some big problem, or they cost too much, or they're defensively poor, or something else weird. Stick to regular cruisers or frontline ships and play a few games, see where that gets you, and then start expanding with some special use ships. All right, so that is it. We kind of flew through this one compared to my normal speed. I'm going to go ahead and I'll probably go ahead and sign out for tonight. I'll finish my SRS probably tomorrow. But like I say, the key here is if you were a beginner and you find that the gloves are coming off, or you're not enjoying the game because suddenly you're basically getting tabled to round 1, right? You're getting devastated round 1, round 2 you're basically dead, round 3 the game's decided. These tips should help you. They should help you. That should stop happening as soon as you start saying, oh, wait a minute, what's your kill zone? Oh shit, I'm not going to sail into that. I'm not even going to deploy into that if you can help it. That's where it's got to start, is deployment. Some people don't like to play that way because it is a little more difficult. It requires more thinking. And you got to have an opponent that is at least willing to humor you a little bit for when you start. It's a very unpleasant experience to have somebody constantly nagging you about pre-measuring And most likely the reason they're doing it is because they want to puppy stomp you, or just noob crush you. And suddenly they realize, oh shit, he's not falling into the regular tricks. I might have to think about this game. It scares a lot of people, especially people with like gamer anxiety. They just want to win. You know, they don't care. They don't care if you have one crippled monitor on your side and they have 2,000 points. Just the rush of winning is enough for them. They're not going to appreciate you trying to learn the game. It'll take a little time for it to become second nature, to just really quickly be able to say, oh, I see he's got heavy gun batteries and focused gunnery. Let's give a quick measure. Okay, he can't get within closing range of me at this time. So this is a safe move or something like that. But anyway, I hope this was helpful to you. And that's kind of what happens when you go from a beginner to an intermediate player. Beginner, you're just trying to grasp the rules. You're just trying to figure out the basics of the game. You shouldn't be too worried about things like the Valor deck composition or how many activations you have, things like that. But an intermediate player who wants to stick with the game, doesn't want to get tabled, he wants to have a clean fight. This is the type of stuff you got to start doing, is planning stuff out. And I would also suggest that bring your players along, bring your gaming group along. You know, sometimes it's fun to say, oh, I've got the tricks and now I can beat you because I can set up kill zones and I know you're too dumb to avoid them. That doesn't make for a good community. It doesn't make for people that want to continue playing the game with you. So, you know, bring them along, teach them the tricks. Both of you will get better. And that it makes for a better gaming experience. And if you do find yourself to be a gamer anxiety type, try to let go. Even if it's something as petty as just telling the opponent, hey, you know, I'm trying out some new stuff. I'm just trying to get some practice in. I don't expect to win this game. Just let them know. You know, it's kind of a cheap shot because it's going to diminish any victory they get, especially if you're trying. But if that's what it takes for you to be able to relax while playing a game, man, just do it. You'll be a lot happier. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. And like I say, that's all I've got.